Secular and socialist in America. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And before I get into the rise of socialism, the rise of the embrace of socialism, and simultaneous turn of America toward secularism, I want to quickly mention you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for faith-based podcasts. You can get Bold and Blunt at washingtontimes.com and however you want to look at it, you can get Bold and Blunt wherever you get your podcasts. So the growing embrace of socialism in America, we've all seen the polls, we've all heard the dire predictions from conservatives, because it's conservatives who care most about saving America from socialism. It's progressives, which is another word for socialists. It's the progressives, the Democrats, the socialists in the Democrat Party, who care about the growth of socialism in America because it gives them cause for cheer. But it's the conservatives, the patriotic Americans, the traditional, constitutionally minded Americans who are concerned about this growth of socialism, this embrace of socialism, particularly among the youth. And it comes by no odd coincidence. At the same time, America is turning more and more from a path of God. The churches are being emptied in some spots in America. I understand by interviewing certain pastors on Bold and Blunt, no less, such as Pastor Jack Hibbs out in Chino Hills, California. His particular church, his particular congregation has actually grown quite a bit over the last year or two. But from other pastors, from other articles I've read, churches are being emptied. Fewer and fewer Americans find Sunday as the time to worship God, but rather the time to go shopping, the time for football during football season, the time for sleeping in, the time for anything but church. And then we just had this poll recently, just the last couple of weeks, that showed 88% of Americans, I think it was 88% of Americans do not believe that the Bible is the truthful, trustworthy Word of God. In other words, the Bible is a book of fairy tales, myths, inspired words written by smart people, but not the actual Word of God. And that's troublesome. That is definitely troublesome, because what that means is the moral decay of America is not only real, but it's speeding right along. Once people in America stop taking their moral compass from God and start taking their morality, their standards of behavior and standards of morality from their own minds and hearts, or worse, from the government, then it's only a short hop, skip, and jump before chaos ensues and the real crumbling of America begins. And really, under the last couple years of the coronavirus, and I've said this before, I've said this in different interviews, I've said this on Bold and Blunt numerous times, the one thing that actually shocked me about the government's overreach and use of fear to justify seizure of individual liberties and constitutional freedoms in America, the one thing that actually shocked me was that churches obeyed and shut their doors. I thought for sure churches would stand up and tell the government to get bent, or some other, perhaps more polite way of saying the same thing, but too many churches didn't. Too many churches in America, by government mandate, by government order, shut their doors and cowered in fear and pretended as if they didn't have the right to question the government. That is unacceptable in a nation where rights come from God and government is only in place to preserve and protect those rights. That is unacceptable in a nation of God-given liberties. And it's the youth who are suffering the most many of whom may not even realize that they're suffering from government's overreach during the coronavirus. There's this piece in The Hill that struck me as interesting, and I'm going to read several paragraphs from it because it's dead on in terms of where children are in America, due in large part to the coronavirus. But the theme of this piece is not so much the coronavirus. So let me just read it, and then I'll tell you my thoughts on it, and then I'll bring in my guest today. Our children are in crisis. Thus, our village is in crisis. It's an opinion piece by Amy Wimpy Knight. Wimpy Knight, that's her name. As a society, she writes, we often refer to the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. The village, families, friends, schools, clinical professionals, communities, and elected officials has never been more important as our children experience the pain and impacts caused by struggles with their mental health. Our children are in crisis. Thus, our village is in crisis. Just to sidestep really quickly, I never bought into that Hillary Clinton line of logic. It takes a village to raise a child. It really doesn't. It takes functioning parents and a stable home to raise a child. And certainly once you bring in the village, which is another word for describing the government, that's when families and family units get sort of mucked up. But so be it. This is what this piece is about. Our children are in crisis, thus our village is in crisis. And I can certainly agree that if families in America are in crisis, then that means the entire foundations of society are also, by logical extension, in crisis, because it's the family unit that forms all of society. Back to this piece by Amy Wimpy Knight. The numbers are heartbreaking. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, found that mental health-related emergency department or ED visits increased 24% for children ages 5 to 11 and 17% for adolescents ages 12 to 17 in 2020 compared to the same months of 2019. In 2021, the CDC found that 4 in 10 teens reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, while 1 in 5 reported contemplating suicide. Despite a growing awareness of the crisis through the COVID-19 pandemic, cases continued to climb. In 2021, children's hospitals across the U.S. saw a 31% increase in mental health inpatient admissions for children and teens ages 3 to 18, and a 153% increase in emergency room visits for suicide attempts and self-injury for kids ages 5 to 18 compared to 2016. And I know that's a mouthful of statistics. I know you probably have to rewind this podcast to listen to those stats again and let them really sink in. So let me just summarize. Children, speaking of the mental health of children, are in deep, deep doo-doo, right? Their statistics of suicide, behavioral issues, hospital admissions for depression, and other psychological disorders are at all-time highs. And so this piece goes on to say that what we need in America is more money, more attention given to the issue, more services provided at the federal, state, and local level. Okay, you can make that argument, but here's the thing. It's because of the left, it's because of Democrats and their policies and platforms and agendas that children are facing a crisis in America right now at all. It was Democrats who pressed for schools to shut down for months, even for a full year in some spots of America. And then when they opened, to stick face masks all over the faces of their kids. From riding the bus to school, to wearing them on the playground, to barely pulling them down to shove a quick bite in their mouths at lunchtime, and then back up the face mask, go back into the classroom where they were treated to teachers with fully face masked faces, and so they couldn't see the expressions on their own teachers' faces. And that's how their days went. And yes, maybe older kids can adjust to that, but the younger kids who are still learning speaking skills and how to translate body language and facial expressions, that is damage that lasts. So Democrats did that. What else did Democrats do? Well, Democrats forced kids to stay home for far too long during the 2+ years of the coronavirus because teachers' unions fought to keep kids home from school out of fear of the coronavirus for their teachers, so they said. And some of these kids actually come from broken homes and from dysfunctional homes where at home they're abused, they're neglected, they're treated to all kinds of psychological, mental, physical abuse, and their only chance for a few hours of peace each day is to go to school. And Democrats took school away from them. So that's strike two, Democrats harming our children. Then here comes the LGBTQ agenda and the LGBTQ campaign, where we have been treated over the last year, mostly due to libs of TikTok who have captured these atrocities on fabulous videos so we can all see what's actually taking place across America. We've seen men dressed as women, drag queens, dancing for dollars in bars and nightclubs and facilities across America where parents have actually brought their little kids and given their kids dollars to give to these drag queens. It's disgusting. And this feeds into the mental dysfunction of our youth. Again, another Democrat-pushed agenda. Strike three. And so it's no wonder we have kids facing these psychological issues, depression, because they've had their entire years of school taken away from them. Think of people who were in their senior year in high school when schools first shut down, and so their athletic scholarships were ripped away, or headed off to college their first year when coronavirus hit. And then, as soon as they get to college, told that they have to stay in their dorm room instead of being out and about and taking advantage of all that campus life is supposed to offer by way of social activities. They have to stay in their dorm room and take all their classes online on a laptop. And then the parents ask for a refund? Oh, sorry, we don't have refund money for that. So kids have been treated to the Democrat special of psychological dysfunction. And now we have all these stats. Like I said, you probably have to rewind to get them all to sink in. But we have mental health-related emergency department visits increasing 24% for children ages 5 to 11 and 17% adolescents ages 12 to 17 in 2020 compared to 2019, and so forth and so on. And so, yes, we can throw money at it, and we can say we need more federal attention and state attention and locals' attention to this matter, and we need to address what's taken place across America in terms of damage to our youngest and most innocent. And we can talk about villages raising children instead of parents and stable homes and stable functioning parents in stable functioning homes raising children. We can do all that. But let's just cut to the chase and call it out for what it is. It's Democrat agenda that is killing our nation's youth. And when I say Democrat, what I really mean is socialist, because this is the socialist way to destroy the family unit so as to create situations where somebody has to come in and save the family unit and instill calm among the chaos. And guess who can come in and save this family unit? Why, your friendly government bureaucrat. That's who. They're from the government. They're there to help. My guest today has quite a bit to say about the state of America. He is Chris Salcedo. He hosts on Newsmax TV his own show, The Chris Salcedo Show. He has his own radio show. He has his own podcast called Salcedo Storm Podcast. And I did not know this, but apparently he's also an author. In 2014, he wrote the book Liberty Rises. And I'm happy to say he wrote the foreword to my most recent book, Lock Down, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. He's here today, and we're doing something very interesting. This is a pre-recorded interview, recorded it just a few days ago, and Chris is going to broadcast this interview also on his podcast, as I said, Salcedo Storm Podcast. You can find out all you want about Chris Salcedo at chrissalcedo.com, ChrisSalcedo.com. Not that you need me to spell it, because you see him all over Newsmax all the time, or at least between 4 and 5 p.m. Eastern. But if you miss any portion of this Bold and Blunt podcast, you can also pick it up at Chris Salcedo's own website. Chris, thank you so much for being here. It's great to chat with you. Great to have you on Bold and Blunt.
Great to be here. And you know what? I got to tell you, Cheryl, this is historic. I mean, it's probably happened in radio because I've actually done it in radio. But we're actually simul-podcasting, which I don't know happens very often.
It's amazing, isn't it? Technology bringing two geniuses like us together.
There you go. There you go. Well, see, you're going to be featured on mine. Yeah, you're going to be on mine. I'm going to be on yours, and it's all great.
Oh, absolutely. What a gift, right? So I want to first mention my big thank you to you publicly now for doing the foreword to my book, Lockdown. It was really a great day when you said that you would write that foreword, and I was so blessed and honored to have you as part of that project. So thank you.
Well, you know, you and I, and we were just talking about this before the podcast started, we sit there on television on Newsmax, or when we're hearing each other in different, or reading each other in different venues, we nod a lot. You and I are on the same page. So when you asked me, first off, it was my honor to write the foreword for your book, and I was just flabbergasted that you had asked me, and so I wanted to do right by you because, frankly, you're doing so much good work out there, and so I'm glad it just meshed, as with all the rest of our political views and worldview seems to mesh out there.
Well, you nail it all the time, and you're right. I watch you regularly on Newsmax TV, and I'm oftentimes at home nodding to myself because you nail it in calling out the socialists. Far too many conservatives, I think, and this is kind of why Donald Trump had such a wind at his back, I believe, and I wonder if you could respond to that. But too many conservatives fail to call out socialism. They play that Democrat dance and allow the left to define their socialism and even communism as progressivism. Don't you think Donald Trump nailed it as well?
I think he did, and I think he was forthright, and you know, to me, in my view, conservatives never let socialism slide. That's Republicans' job. So
True.
You and I, as conservatives, see the threat, acknowledge the threat, confront the threat. Republicans see the threat and want to go to dinner with the threat, or want to have a cocktail party with the threat to America. And I don't understand the likes of Mitch McConnell and Mitt Romney for their acquiescence and their timidity in the face of existential threats to this country and to the Constitution and to our way of life. But there's a lot about the Republican Party today that I don't understand.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. Thanks for making that. The difference between Republicans as a party and conservatives in America. And I'm looking around right now at the political landscape in America, and I'm thinking there's no way that Democrats can win either the midterms or the White House. But then again, I didn't think there was any way Joe Biden could win either. What do you see?
I see that if we lived in an America 10 or 15 years ago, I think that your statement would be more true than it has ever been, because we had a system in place where, at least at the time, the Democrat socialists had to pretend that they bought into the United States Constitution, free speech, and the traditions of America. Today, courtesy of Barack Hussein Obama, they are not encumbered by that illusion anymore. That's why I think that if all things were equal 10, 15 years ago, it would be an absolutely devastating election for Democrats. But because of their efforts on the state level, because of their efforts to normalize illegal activity in this country, the Democrats are doing their best with some Republican help to blunt the negative impact from the misery that the Democrats have heaped on us. And I say Republican help, and I'll point to John Cornyn.
Here's John Cornyn, a guy who tripped all over himself with 15 other Republicans to get out there and swallow this idea that gun control was going to somehow solve gun violence in the United States of America, and that absurd law that benefited no one, as the recent shooting just confirmed. But I truly believe Mitch McConnell and John Cornyn and some of the other, establishment Republicans are doing their best to blunt the overwhelming red wave tsunami that's coming electorally in the fall, because they don't want their Democrat friends to get wiped out. And to me, that's a step too far. That's why I've never been more disenchanted with the Republican Party than I am today.
It's almost like, and I don't want to go into conspiracy theory land here, but there's something distinctly different about what's taking place in the political landscape than before Barack Obama, because I think you're correct in nailing down a difference under Barack Obama that wasn't here in this country before. But it's almost as if Republicans in Congress, they don't think America is going to survive as the leader on the world stage, so they want to jump ship in order to protect their own in the future. And that's why you have, it seems to me, so many Republicans siding more with China and the global bodies like the World Economic Forum over America. Am I wrong there? Am I wearing a tin hat on that?
That's so funny. I was just having a conversation with a Newsmax contributor before I jumped on the podcast with you about that very issue.
Of course you were.
Well, I mean, seriously, you've got headlines coming out that Joe Biden facilitated the release of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, millions of gallons, millions of barrels of oil that the American people paid for, and he shipped that oil overseas to European countries and to communist China. Then you've got the tweet coming out of communist China from their propaganda arm, their media arm over there, state-run media, praising Joe Biden for attacking American businesses. And then you look at the landscape where the Democrat Party has done nothing, has done zero to bring accountability to communist China over the China virus and their culpability in spreading and causing the pandemic. You get the sense that not only is the Democrat Party universally, maybe because they're ideologically wed to the communist regime in China, the most inhuman and racist regime in American history, but then you look over at like Mitt Romney and other Republicans who are just sitting on their hands, I guess out of deference to some business concerns, willing to sell America's future to a communist regime because it's good for business. And I cannot fathom what goes through the likes of Mitch McConnell's head in that calculation.
You know, I'm not positive what your faith is, but however you want to respond to this, because this is sort of out of the blue, I guess. But the church community, and just to let you know, I'm Christian and conservative, and I pay attention to church sermons. I attend church frequently. And it seems to me over the last year in particular, especially even under COVID, churches have been talking about Revelation and end times quite a bit and applying biblical principles to what's taking place on the political landscape today. And they're pointing to like Russia, and they're pointing to what you just described taking place in the political realm as all glaring signs of hurtling toward Revelation type days. And I just wonder what your views are on that, if that's a fair question.
Well, it is, and I am a devout Catholic. So, and very much aware, and not that I'm getting much of this from the pulpit, from my faith community. My faith community, don't get me wrong, I love our priests. They just keep a focus and to their credit, biblically, on how we're supposed to be looking to the hereafter, the life hereafter. So they keep their focus there and not so much on the modern day, what's happening to us. But I, as a Catholic, understanding Revelation, I've got to be honest with you, I am seeing a lot of these signs that you're alluding to, and I think a lot of Catholics and Christians in general are getting a real sense as we're seeing the country that was founded on Judeo-Christian principles folding courtesy of enemies from within. And the march of left-wing progressivism and what's the word I'm looking for? It's a society devoid of religious concerns pushed by socialism in communist countries, a secular society.
Yes.
That's the phrase I was looking for. We're seeing that push, of course, from the communist world, and you're seeing a receptive ear from pop culture in America and the Democrat Party in America.
And I have to say, that's what worries me the most. I just saw a survey out today, and it was actually in the Washington Times, about how fewer and fewer Americans think that the Bible is actual truthful word from God. They think it's maybe inspired word, or it's just fairy tales. And if you look, just a couple weeks ago, we had those polls showing that fewer and fewer Americans even believe in God. That just bodes darkly for America's future.
It does, and you can blame GovEd. The worst mistake this nation ever made was allowing the government to educate our children. And in so doing, they have driven God from the schools and from the public square. And Reagan spoke eloquently about this in my home state of Texas back in 1984 at an ecumenical breakfast. He was talking about how the fall of every great civilization was preceded by the country's turning away from its God or gods. And he lamented the fact that a society that does this, without God, there's no prompting of the conscience, he said. And that's why we've got elected leaders like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and the Democrat Party and frankly, like Mitch McConnell and John Cornyn, men and women who do not have a prompting of the conscience. They live for today, they live for this world, and they don't even imagine an all-seeing and all-knowing God looking over their shoulder to saying, hey, how are you treating your fellow man? Cheryl, you can do all manner of dangerous and evil things to your fellow man when you believe you're not going to be held accountable, if you believe this is all there is on earth.
Yeah, and you look around and you see the Democrats taking to the streets and splashing red paint on the front of their white pants to protest the Supreme Court decision returning abortion to the states to decide. And you can see that all manner of evil playing out right before our eyes. When you look at the youth of this country, the millennials, the Gen Zers, and even younger, do you have an optimistic viewpoint?
That's a toughie because...
Right?
Well,
I know.
There are bright... I mean, I'm a father, so there are bright spots I see in my own children who are, by the way, raised outside of GovEd, raised in Catholic education. I see bright spots in certain aspects of the millennial generation, certain aspects of even Gen Z. But I am underwhelmed by the performance of GovEd that puts an emphasis on social engineering and not actual engineering. That puts an emphasis on debauchery rather than treating, or teaching, I should say, writing, reading, arithmetic, and the sciences. So long as the left wing maintains an ironclad grip on GovEd, I do not have high hopes for our country, nor should anybody else listening to this podcast.
I got to say I agree with you there, and underwhelmed is a good word for it. So when you look at November, which is coming up quick, what do you see happening? Do you see the Republicans with a sweep, or do you think the country is a little bit more tight in between left and right than that?
As far as the elections are concerned?
As far as the elections, yes.
Yeah, because I think the elections, like I said, all things equal, if the Republican Party did their job in their states, shoring up election integrity, then it should be very, very good for the Republican Party. I think that as good for the Republican Party as it's going to be, I don't think that reflects the sentiment of the nation writ large. I think that systems and criteria have been set up by what some would call the deep state. Permanent Washington is what I call them. Individuals who are unelected, nameless, faceless bureaucrats who have power that was never envisioned that they have by the Constitution. I think that they have done their best to blunt the overwhelming ire and the will of the American people. And they have done so under the false rubric of, it's for their own good. So I'd like to say that we are going to get a fair representation of the anger and the ire of the American people at the Democrat Party for what they have done, from the border to the drug crises to the international crises that we are enduring. But at this point, I don't have faith because of what transpired in 2020. I don't have faith that the will of the people is going to be fully exercised in the election.
That's bleak. That's bleak, but that's reality. That's the truth of what's taken place. And just to skip to a different topic real quick, because I know our time grows tight. How many people wearing face masks are still out in your neck of the woods, which is Texas?
In the great state of Texas, I am proud to say that it is back to pre-pandemic levels for masking. You get the odd person who, say la, let live and let live, who are wearing masks. By and large, the masks have been ditched because the vast majority of Texans understand the science, and they understand the political science, that it was a control exercise, a thought control exercise, and not an exercise in science.
Right. Well, I live in Northern Virginia, and I see way too many people wearing face masks still. And worse, I see them driving down the road in their cars by themselves wearing face masks, Chris. More than once. I see that every day. And that kind of tells me that there's a lot of dumb voters out there, I got to say.
Well, in Virginia, if you're living in the area that I used to live in when I did my time, and that's how I looked at it, I did my time in the nation's capital. Yeah, there's a lot of people around Alexandria who are just full tilt bozo nuts. But there's a meme around the internet, I'm not sure if you've seen it, Cheryl, that shows, for those of you who love wearing your mask in your car, have a look at the brand new seatbelt for your walking around the park.
I have seen that.
It's a dude wearing a seatbelt walking around the park saying, yeah, now you're doubly safe.
It's hilarious. Well, you know what? It would be hilarious, but there are too many people who actually look at that and think, hey, that may be a good idea, Anthony Fauci. So
well, it's funny because it's true, and I guess I should do my Anthony Fauci impersonation for you. Look, Cheryl, I want to be very clear.
Oh, please stop. I have enough of him. Every time I see him on the news, I have to turn the station, it seems. But so just to wrap up, Chris, we talked a lot about uncomfortable truths, dark truths about America, but you and I are both in love with America and the spirit of America, and it's not over till the fat lady sings, right?
Right. I have never underestimated, and back to Reagan, he never did either. He always believed that the American people, given the right information, a little hope, would always make the right decision. And I've got to believe that as a conservative at my core. And I sense you're wrapping up the podcast, so let me give you a little point of laughter, if I could.
All right.
The other, and it might give you hope, because I got so much positive reaction from this, it may give you hope. As you know, Liz Cheney spoke at the Reagan Presidential Library. She was speaking on the future of the Republican Party. And I observed that, asking Liz Cheney to speak on the future of the Republican Party is like inviting the CEO of Planned Parenthood to speak on the future of America's youth. It just makes no sense, and I think the American people are awakening to that fact.
I got to say that's a great analogy. Absolutely right. And I share your optimism for America, but when you're in this business and you see the socialism coming on strong, you can't help but get a little bit down about it, especially when you see the youth embracing it. So it's great to have people out there like you, Chris, doing the good fight for America. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with me on Bold and Blunt, and once again writing that fabulous foreword to my book, Lockdown. Thank you so much.
It has been a privilege to be here and to write that forward, and we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. Remember, it's chrissalcedo.com, SALCEDO. Check out his website and definitely watch him every night, Monday through Friday, 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Newsmax TV. He calls it out. He calls out the left for what the left is, a bunch of socialists masquerading as Democrats. And he never disappoints with his patriotic viewpoints. Thank you for listening. I want to remind you that if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, or wherever podcasts are offered. You can also pick up a copy of my book, Lockdown, The Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom, which Chris Salcedo, as I mentioned, wrote the foreword for. Anywhere books are offered, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon, or at CherylChumley.com. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.